Travis opened his eyes slowly, feeling the gentle rocking under his body. The rhythmic sound of the train's wheels echoed in his ears, like a steady but comforting heartbeat. He blinked several times, trying to get his bearings, but all he found was confusion. At first, the environment seemed normal. Rows of seats lined up, windows revealing only the darkness outside. But there was something wrong, something he couldn't identify. Sitting in a seat near the aisle, Travis looked around, trying to remember how he had gotten there. His mind was empty, as if someone had erased the last few hours from his memory. He tried to concentrate, pulling for any shred of memory, but all he found was a disconcerting emptiness. It was as if he had suddenly been put there, without any warning or reason. The other passengers were motionless, almost like statues. Some stared straight ahead, while others had their eyes closed, perhaps asleep. Travis watched them for a few seconds, waiting for someone to move, for some natural interaction to take place, a wheeze, a yawn, anything. But there was nothing. The stillness was almost palpable, heavy, as if the air inside that carriage was saturated with something invisible and oppressive. He leaned forward, trying to see the face of a woman sitting on the other side of the aisle. She was pale, her gaze fixed on a point ahead, her lips curved into a thin line. Travis hesitated, but finally broke the silence. "Excuse me." His voice sounded louder than he expected, almost shocking against the silence. The woman didn't react. He tried again, this time more firmly. "Hey, do you know where we are?" No answer, no movement. It was as if he were invisible. A shiver ran down Travis' spine, and he stood up slowly, feeling the firm floor beneath his feet. He took a few steps down the aisle, passing the other passengers, but they were all equally inert, trapped in their own worlds. The train continued its steady movement, but where was it going? And why was it there? Travis stopped in the middle of the carriage, feeling more disoriented than ever. He looked out of the window, but all he could see was impenetrable darkness. There was no landscape, no lights, nothing to indicate any location. Just the vague reflection of his own face, which seemed strangely distant. He ran a hand over his head, trying to shake off the growing feeling of panic. The situation was unreal, like a dream he couldn't wake up from. But the texture of the seat under his hands, the sound of the train, the slightly metallic smell in the air, it was all real, undeniably real. Travis took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. He needed answers, and somehow he had the feeling that they were hidden somewhere on that train. The only question was, where to start looking? And perhaps more importantly, was he prepared for what he might find? The discomfort Travis felt grew by the minute. The carriage around him seemed suffocating, as if the air was getting heavier, harder to breathe. He knew he had to act, that sitting there waiting for answers would get him nowhere. With one last glance at the motionless passengers, he decided to explore the train. He walked to the end of the carriage, where a metal door separated that space from another. For a moment, Travis hesitated. There was something deeply unsettling about that door, as if he were crossing a threshold into the unknown. But the urge to find out what was going on was stronger than his fear. He pushed the door and was greeted by a hissing sound of compressed air as it opened, revealing a narrow corridor leading to the next carriage. The new carriage looked different from the previous one. The seats were dark leather, worn by time, and the curtains on the windows were faded velvet, a stark contrast to the previous carriage, where everything looked strangely modern. Travis moved forward, his eyes scanning every detail. The atmosphere seemed to belong to a different era, as if the train was stuck in some kind of time warp. The passengers in this carriage were different too. Men and women, dressed in outfits that seemed to have come out of decades past, occupied the seats. There was a man in a bowler hat reading an old newspaper, a woman in a period dress holding a handbag in both hands, and a child with a wooden toy on her lap. But just as before, everyone was strangely still, oblivious to Travis' presence. He stopped in front of the man in the bowler hat and leaned over to try to read the newspaper. The letters were slightly blurred, difficult to decipher, but he managed to catch a headline that talked about a railroad disaster that had occurred many years ago. The date, however, was illegible, as if the ink had been swept away by an invisible hand. A shiver ran down Travis' spine. Something was deeply wrong, and each new detail seemed to confirm his suspicions. He continued walking, the atmosphere in the carriage becoming increasingly oppressive. There was a strange smell in the air, something he couldn't fully identify, but which evoked images of damp and decay. The wagon seemed to have a life of its own, as if it were watching his every move, waiting for him to make a mistake. When he reached the end of the carriage, Travis found yet another door. Without wasting any time, he pushed it open and entered the next carriage, which surprised him by being even more different. This one was full of flashing neon lights, as if it were a party car. There was low music playing, old jazz that didn't seem to match the vibrant lights. The passengers here were dressed in extravagant clothes, as if they were at a celebration that would never end. But the strangeness remained. They were also motionless, frozen in poses of amusement, but with empty expressions that contrasted violently with the festive atmosphere. It was a disconcerting scene, as if Travis had stepped into a distorted painting of a joyful moment, now eternally trapped. A woman in the corner of the carriage held a glass of champagne that seemed about to fall out of her hands. Travis watched the glass carefully, but it didn't move, as if time in that place had stopped. He wondered if somehow each carriage was stuck in its own moment, eternally repeating a slice of frozen time. Travis began to feel a pressure in his mind, a sense that he was being pushed to the limits of his sanity. Each wagon seemed like a piece of a macabre puzzle, but he still couldn't see the full picture. He needed to keep going, to explore each wagon in the hope of finding something, anything that could explain what was happening. Once again, he moved forward, going through another door. But as he went on, the feeling that he was getting further and further away from reality and plunging into an endless nightmare only increased. What was waiting for him in the next carriage? And most disturbing of all, was he prepared to discover the truth about that train? Travis took a deep breath and opened the next door, ready to face whatever was waiting. Travis advanced to the next carriage, the familiar sound of the door sliding back and closing behind him. This new carriage was even more unsettling than the previous ones. Unlike the past wagons, there was no natural or artificial lighting. The only light came from candles scattered along the walls, casting dancing shadows and creating an even more oppressive atmosphere. The silence, interrupted only by the sound of the train wheels on the tracks, was almost absolute. The atmosphere evoked a sense of lost time, as if he had entered an ancient place of worship. The candles were arranged in a ritualistic manner, and the air carried a scent of melted wax mixed with something sour, as if the space had been left to rot slowly. Travis couldn't shake the feeling that he was entering deeper into a distorted reality, where time and space didn't follow the normal rules. In the center of the wagon, something caught his eye, an old, worn wooden table on which rested a small chest. The chest, decorated with symbols that Travis couldn't decipher, seemed strangely out of place there, as if it were an object of great importance. He approached cautiously, his footsteps echoing lightly on the wooden floor. There was something unsettling about that box, but also an irresistible attraction. He reached out and with a hesitant touch opened the chest. Inside, he found a pile of old letters, yellowed by time, and a small leather-bound notebook. With slightly trembling hands, Travis picked up the notebook first, opening it carefully. The pages were full of handwritten notes, the words engraved in meticulous ancient handwriting. As he flipped through the pages, he realized that the notes talked about the train, referring to it as a crossing between worlds. The words described the train as a kind of mobile purgatory, a place where lost souls were carried through different dimensions, each represented by the wagons he had passed. The descriptions were vague and mysterious, but the message was clear. The train was not just a means of transportation, but a limbo for those who had a score to settle with the past. Travis felt a chill as he read the notes. They spoke of passengers who couldn't move on, who were trapped in cycles of regret, guilt, and sadness. Each wagon, according to the notebook, reflected a fragment of these souls' lives, frozen in time, repeating the same moments over and over again. Suddenly, he remembered the letters that were still inside the trunk. He put the notebook aside and began to examine them. Each letter seemed to be written by a different passenger, all telling disturbing stories from their lives. They were accounts of personal tragedies, deep regrets, and choices that had condemned them to an existence of torment. As he read, Travis began to feel a strange connection with those stories, as if they weren't completely alien to him. There was something familiar, a dark resonance that made him uncomfortable. That's when he came to the last letter, written in even more irregular and disorganized handwriting, as if the author was on the verge of despair. The letter described the train itself, how it moved between worlds, carrying those who couldn't leave the past behind. The author talked about trying to escape, but always ending up back at the same point, as if trapped in an eternal cycle. The end of the letter was abrupt, with a single sentence standing out. "You're here too, Travis, because you can't get free." Travis' heart raced. The paper fell from his hands as he stepped back, shocked. How could this letter know his name? He couldn't remember how he had got on the train, but now he began to suspect that his presence there was no accident. He felt panic rising, but also a renewed determination. He needed to understand what was going on, find out why he was on that train, and above all, find a way to get off. Still shaken by the revelation, Travis knew he couldn't stop now. The mystery was far from solved, but he had a clue, a connection he needed to explore. Putting the notebook and letter away, he took a deep breath and prepared to continue his journey. The feeling that he was approaching something much bigger, something that challenged his own understanding of reality, was overwhelming. But he had no choice. He had to keep going, no matter how terrifying the path. Travis put the notebook and the letters back in the trunk, trying to control the whirlwind of emotions that threatened to take over his mind. The revelation that his name was mentioned in one of the letters had shaken his certainties, but it had also ignited a flame of determination. He needed to find out more. He needed to understand why he was on that train and how to get off it. He opened the door to the next carriage, but as soon as he crossed the threshold, a wave of vertigo hit him. Travis staggered, clutching the wall to keep himself upright. When he finally managed to regain his balance, he realized that the carriage in front of him was unlike anything he had seen so far. The space was filled with a thick darkness, broken only by small flickering lights that seemed to float in the air like fireflies on a moonless night. The atmosphere was stifling, the air thick with an acrid smell that made him nauseous. Travis felt his heart beating faster, anxiety rising like a tide. He took a hesitant step forward, and as soon as he did, the lights around him began to move, revealing scenes that left him perplexed. The floating lights projected images onto the dark walls of the carriage, as if they were small movie projectors. Travis watched in horror as the scenes showed moments from his life that he would rather forget. One light showed a violent argument he'd had with his father years ago, a fight that had driven them apart forever. Another showed the face of a woman he had loved, but lost because of his pride and stubbornness. More lights revealed other moments, mistakes he had made, choices that haunted him to this day. The images were vivid, as if they were happening again before his eyes. Travis tried to look away, but it was impossible. He was stuck there, forced to watch these painful memories, reliving every mistake, every regret. The scenes were repeated, distorted, as if they wanted him to feel the pain again and again. Suddenly the lights began to move faster, the scenes overlapping, becoming more confused and chaotic. The voices of the people involved in these memories began to echo around him in a distorted, deafening chorus. Travis covered his ears, trying to block out the sound, but it only got louder, more penetrating, as if he was being attacked by his own thoughts. He felt a sharp pain in his head, as if something was trying to pierce his skull, an unbearable pressure that made him fall to his knees. Travis squeezed his eyes shut tightly, trying to concentrate, trying to find a way to stop it. But the voices continued, now mixed with laughter and malicious whispers, mocking him, his failures, his weakness. At the height of his despair, Travis screamed, a scream of pure agony, and suddenly everything stopped. Silence returned, so abruptly that it seemed unreal. He opened his eyes slowly, finding himself alone again in the carriage, now completely dark and silent. The lights had disappeared, and the images and voices with them. All that remained was Travis, heavy breathing, and the echo of his scream still ringing in his mind. He stayed there, kneeling on the floor, trying to process what had just happened. It hadn't been a simple memory. It was as if the train had invaded his mind, extracted his deepest fears and regrets, and projected them back at him, forcing him to face what he had tried to bury. After a long moment, Travis finally stood up, his legs still shaky. The carriage was so dark that he could barely see the road ahead, but he knew he couldn't stop. He had to keep going, even if it meant facing more horrors. Every step he took him deeper into a nightmare he feared he would never wake up from. But at the same time, he felt he was getting closer to some truth, something he still couldn't fully understand. Taking a deep breath, Travis moved forward, his hands groping in the dark for the next door. When he finally found it, he felt a chill in his stomach, but also a renewed determination. The train was toying with him, testing his limits, but he wasn't going to give up. There was a reason he was there, and Travis was determined to find it, no matter how terrifying the journey. With this resolution in mind, he pushed open the door and advanced to the next carriage, his heart racing with the anticipation of what was to come. Travis stepped through the door into the next carriage, his body still shaking from the effects of the visions he had just experienced. As he passed through the threshold, he felt an immediate change in the atmosphere. The air, once dense and oppressive, now seemed lighter, almost serene. The new carriage was different from the previous ones. It was narrower, with fewer seats, and in the back, he could see a solitary figure sitting in front of a control panel. It was the train conductor. Travis hesitated for a moment, observing the figure from a distance. The conductor was dressed in an old uniform, faded by time, and wore a conductor's hat that partially shaded his face. There was something deeply disturbing about the way he sat, completely still, his hands resting firmly on the dashboard in front of him. Gathering his courage, Travis began to walk towards the man. With each step, he felt a growing tension, as if he were approaching a truth that could be devastating. When he was only a few meters away, the driver finally moved. He lifted his head slowly, revealing a pale, expressionless face, with eyes that seemed to look right through Travis, as if he wasn't really there. "You've finally arrived, Travis," said the driver, his voice low and deep, resonating through the small space. Travis stopped, his heart beating hard in his chest. How did this man know his name? The same question that had plagued him ever since he read that letter resurfaced in full force. "Who are you? What's going on here?" Travis asked, his voice filled with a mixture of fear and determination. The driver didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stood up slowly, each movement carefully controlled. Travis watched as the man approached, his presence dominating the wagon. When the conductor was only a few steps away, he finally spoke. "This train is not a simple means of transportation, Travis. It's a place of transition, where souls who are lost, who can't free themselves from their regrets and sins, wander until they find resolution or are ready to move on." Travis felt a chill run down his spine. The driver's words confirmed what he feared, but didn't want to believe. "And am I one of those lost souls?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. The conductor nodded slowly, his eyes still fixed on Travis. "You were brought onto this train because you're still stuck in your past, the mistakes you made, and the choices that caused you to lose yourself. Everyone on this train is here for the same reason, reliving their final moments, trapped in an endless cycle of pain and regret." Travis felt a lump form in his throat. "So, I'm dead?" The question left his lips before he could control it, the most terrifying possibility beginning to crystallize in his mind. The driver stepped forward, his expression softening a little, but still carrying a gravity that Travis felt as a weight. "Not all the passengers here are aware of your situation, but you're beginning to understand. Your death wasn't just physical, Travis. It was the result of years of decisions and paths that led you away from who you really were. The train is here to help you face that, to find a way to break free." Travis shook his head, trying to process what he was hearing. "Break free? How? What do I need to do?" The driver looked at him with an intensity that made Travis shudder. "You need to confront what brought you here, Travis. You need to face your greatest fears, your greatest regrets, and find a way to make peace with them. Only then will the cycle be broken and you can move on." Before Travis could reply, the train shook violently, as if it were going through turbulence. The lights flashed, and a low, steady sound began to reverberate through the carriage, increasing in intensity. The conductor looked at the control panel and then back at Travis. "It's starting," he said, his voice now more urgent. "The train is approaching its final destination. You don't have much time, Travis. The decision is yours." Travis felt the urgency in the conductor's words, and the reality of the situation closed in on him like a cold shadow. He knew he could no longer ignore what was happening. He had to make a choice that would determine his ultimate fate. The driver returned to his post, leaving Travis alone to process what he had learned. With his head full of questions and his heart heavy, Travis turned around and started walking back through the wagon. He knew the journey was far from over, but now he understood what was at stake. He needed to prepare himself for what was to come, for the challenges he would still face, and for the truth that was still buried in the depths of his memory. The final leg of the journey was approaching, and Travis knew he only had one chance to break free. He took a deep breath and stepped forward, determined to face whatever awaited him in the next carriage. Travis moved through the train with a new determination, but also with a sense of uncertainty weighing on him. The conductor's words echoed in his mind, reverberating along with the constant sound of the train's wheels on the tracks. Every step he took seemed to take him deeper into the darkness of his own soul, as if the train were a mirror reflecting the darkest corners of his being. As he entered the next carriage, Travis was surprised by a radical change in the environment. Unlike the previous carriages, this was an opulent, almost luxurious space, with gold and red velvet details that recalled an era of glamour and wealth. But the extravagance of the place didn't reassure him. On the contrary, there was something deeply disturbing about its decadent beauty. It was as if the carriage was trying to disguise the rottenness that lurked beneath. As he moved down the corridor, Travis realized that he was alone again. There were no motionless passengers here, no ghostly figures to confront him. Instead, the carriage seemed to be waiting, silent and observant. Every detail, from the elaborate chandeliers to the heavy curtains, seemed charged with meaning, as if the space itself was trying to tell him a story. And then he saw it. At the end of the carriage, a large double door decorated with intricate carvings. Travis felt a chill as he approached, as if the door was pulsating with an energy of its own. It was an irresistible call, a promise of revelations that he knew he had to face. With a trembling hand, he grasped the golden handles and pushed. What he found on the other side left him speechless. The space beyond the doors was a living room, furnished like an 80s family room. The decor was simple but cozy, and there was a fireplace crackling in the corner, casting a soft, comforting light throughout the room. In the center of the room, there was a coffee table with photographs scattered across it. Travis approached, his heart beating fast. The photos were his. He picked up one of the photos, and his heart almost stopped as he recognized the scene. It was him, still young, standing next to his father. His father's face was tense, marked by deep pain, while Travis, with an angry expression, walked away. It was an image of one of the most difficult moments in his life, the day he cut ties with his family for a reason that now seems insignificant, but at the time seemed unbearable. Travis felt tears gathering in his eyes, but he forced himself to continue. He needed to understand what was going on. He picked up another photo, this time of a woman. The woman he had loved deeply, but had left because of his insecurities and fear of commitment. In the picture, she was smiling at the camera, but her eyes were full of sadness, a sadness that Travis now recognized as the same one he carried. Each photo was a window into a regret, a reminder of how he had allowed his own fears and failings to keep him away from those he loved. With each image, the truth became clearer. The train wasn't just showing his past. It was revealing the moments that defined his life, the choices that led to his isolation, and ultimately, to his own downfall. Sitting in the armchair in front of the fireplace, Travis tried to process everything he was seeing. The visions, the letters, the conductor's words, everything pointed to one inescapable truth. He was stuck on that train because he couldn't let go of the past. His life had been consumed by regrets, and now he was paying the price for his choices. But as he stared at the flames in the fireplace, a new question arose in his mind. Why now? Why was he being forced to relive those moments just now? What did the train want him to understand? There was something else, something he hadn't yet understood. Suddenly, the room around him began to change. The walls shook, the photographs on the table began to fade, and the light from the fireplace began to dim. Travis felt fear grow in his chest as the room around him dissolved into darkness. He was heading back to the train, to the next carriage, but now with a new weight on his heart. When the darkness finally dissipated, Travis found himself back in a carriage he hadn't seen before. This one was simple, almost empty, except for a single mirror at the end of the aisle. The mirror was large, with an old, worn frame, and it seemed to call out to him, just as the double door had done before. Travis moved forward slowly, each step heavier than the last. As he approached the mirror, a sense of inevitability enveloped him. He knew that what he would see there wouldn't be easy, but he also knew that he couldn't run away. He stopped in front of the mirror, hesitated for a moment, and then looked at his reflection. What he saw was not just his reflection, but a version of himself that looked much older, tired, and marked by regret. Behind his reflection, at the bottom of the mirror, he saw the faces of those he had left behind, his father, the woman he loved, even friends he had lost along the way. They all looked at him with expressions of sadness and disappointment, as if they were waiting for him to finally understand. And then the truth came like an avalanche. Travis was stuck on that train, not just because he had made mistakes, but because he had never allowed himself to forgive himself. He had spent his life punishing himself, turning away from those who could give him comfort and redemption, all because he couldn't deal with the guilt. The train, with all its horrors and revelations, was trying to force him to face this truth, to accept that he needed to forgive himself in order to move on. With this realization, Travis felt the tears run down his face, but this time they were tears of acceptance. The mirror reflected his pain, but it also showed him that there was a way out, a way to break the cycle. He wasn't ready to leave the train, but now he knew what he needed to do to find peace. There was more to discover, more to face. But for the first time since waking up in that carriage, Travis felt a spark of hope. He turned towards the next door, knowing that the journey wasn't over yet, but also knowing that he was closer to finding the answers he so desperately needed. And with this new determination, he moved on to the next wagon, ready to face whatever was waiting. Travis stepped through the door of the next carriage, feeling the weight of the recent revelation still pressing down on his shoulders. His surroundings changed once again, and he found himself in a carriage unlike any other he had ever explored. This one was dark and claustrophobic, with the walls clad in dark wood, as if the train was now traveling through the depths of some place forgotten by time. The lights were dim, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to move as it went along. There was a sepulchral silence, interrupted only by the distant sound of wheels on rails. Every step Travis took echoed, as if he were descending deeper and deeper into an abyss from which he might never emerge. At the end of the carriage, Travis saw something that made him stop. A series of doors, each marked with a different symbol, but all seeming to call out to him. There was a heavy symbolism there, as if each door represented a choice, a path, or perhaps a piece of his past that he still needed to confront. He knew that this was the most important moment of his journey, and that the answers he sought lay behind these doors. Travis approached the first door, marked with the symbol of an incomplete circle. As he touched it, the door slowly opened, revealing a scene that took him back in time. He saw himself again as a young man, standing in the living room of his childhood home, confronting his father. It was the day everything fell apart between them. The day Travis, overcome by anger and pride, decided to cut ties with the man who raised him. He watched the scene unfold like a helpless spectator. His younger self screamed at his father, accusing him of never understanding his choices, of being controlling and rigid. Travis' father, a man who now looked frail and tired, just listened in silence, his face marked by pain. Travis, the man who watched everything, felt the old wound open up again, but now with a new understanding. He saw not only the anger, but also the fear and sadness behind her words. When the scene was over, Travis was sucked back into the wagon. He closed the door slowly, feeling the weight of emotion crush his chest. There was no changing the past, but he knew now that he could at least make peace with it. He moved on to the next door, marked with the symbol of a broken heart. When he opened it, he was transported to a familiar apartment. There he was, a few years older, sitting at a dinner table with the woman he had loved and lost. She was crying, trying to understand why he was ending everything, why he was giving up something so precious. Travis, at that time, couldn't express his fear of commitment, his fear of failing and hurting someone he loved so much. Instead, he took the easy way out, walking away. The pain of reliving that moment was intense, almost unbearable, but Travis knew it was necessary. He needed to see what he hadn't been able to admit before, that fear had led him to make decisions that condemned him to loneliness. And just like in the first scene, there was no way to change what had happened, but there was the possibility of forgiving himself. When he returned to the wagon, Travis felt exhausted, but somehow lighter. He closed the second door, aware that there was still more to face. He approached the third door, marked with a symbol he didn't immediately recognize. As he touched it, he felt a wave of mixed emotions, pain, regret, and something deeper, almost indescribable. The third scene took him to a hospital. He was standing next to a bed where an old friend was dying. Travis remembered that moment well. His friend had been in an accident, and Travis had only been to visit him once, unable to cope with the sight of someone so close withering away. He had distanced himself, justifying to himself that it was for the best, that he couldn't bear to see him go. But now, seeing that scene again, he realized that his withdrawal had not only been an attempt to protect himself, but also a betrayal of the friend who needed him. Tears flowed freely down Travis' face as he watched that scene for the last time. The guilt he had carried for so many years finally made sense. It wasn't just for his actions, but for his inaction, for the times he wasn't there when he should have been. He clung to this truth, feeling it settle in his heart with a deep ache, but also with a strange relief. When the scene was over, Travis returned to the wagon, now shaking with emotional exhaustion. He closed the third door and turned to the last one, which was marked with a simple period. This door seemed more definitive, more threatening. He knew that what lay behind it would be the most difficult to face, but it was also necessary. With a deep sigh, Travis reached out and opened the last door. As he crossed the threshold, he was greeted by complete darkness. For a moment, he thought there might be nothing left, but then, slowly, a light began to emerge, revealing an image he hadn't expected. It was a reflection of himself, younger, but not very different from the man he was now. This younger Travis was alone, sitting in a chair, looking out a window that overlooked the emptiness. He approached, knowing instinctively that this was the final confrontation. The younger Travis looked at him with eyes full of sadness, but also of understanding. "You always knew, didn't you?" Travis heard himself say. "I always knew that what I feared most was loneliness, but that's exactly what you sought." Travis, the man who had lived through it all, just nodded, speechless. He knew that was the truth. All his life, he had feared being abandoned, being left alone, and in an act of self-sabotage, he had created his own isolation. But now, in front of himself, he understood that it was time to stop running away, to stop punishing himself. "I need to forgive myself," Travis said aloud, more to himself than to the reflection. "I need to let this go, or he'll never be able to move on." The figure in front of him smiled slightly, as if it already knew the answer. And then, slowly, it began to disappear, like a shadow that dissolves with the sunrise. Travis stood there, alone in the darkness, but with a new clarity and peace that he had never felt before. When he returned to the wagon, he knew that something had changed. He closed the last door and turned around, prepared for whatever came next. He had faced his demons, confronted his past, and was now ready for the next step. With one last look at the closed doors, Travis walked towards the next door, knowing that the journey was close to an end, but there was still something more to discover. He took a deep breath and prepared himself for what awaited him, feeling that for the first time, he was really ready to move on. Travis pushed open the last door with a sense of determination mixed with apprehension. The journey that had brought him to this point had been arduous, full of painful revelations, but he knew it was coming to an end. The carriage he now entered was different from all the others. It was a vast, empty space with no visible walls, as if he were floating in an infinite sea of darkness. In the center of the void, a single figure was standing, waiting for him. It was the conductor, the same enigmatic figure he had met before, but now his presence seemed more imposing, almost ethereal. The light emanating from the driver was soft, but enough to outline his form in the darkness. "You've reached the end, Travis," said the driver, his voice resonating like an echo that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "But the end is not a conclusion, it's a choice." Travis took another step forward, feeling the ground beneath his feet, although there was nothing visible to support him. "A choice?" he asked, his voice laden with a deep weariness, but also with new hope. The driver nodded slowly. "You've gone through your memories, faced your regrets, and seen how your choices have shaped you. Now, it's up to you to decide what to do with it all. This train is not a place of condemnation, Travis, but a space of transition. You can choose to continue, to move on to the next stage of your existence, or you can go back and try to live again with the knowledge you've acquired." Travis remained silent, processing the driver's words. The idea of moving on, of finally finding peace, was tempting. But there was something else, something he still needed to understand. "What if I decide to go back?" asked Travis, his voice low. "If I choose to live again, What does that mean? The driver looked at him, and for a moment Travis felt that there was immense compassion behind those eyes, as if the driver understood the depth of his struggle. Going back means taking what you've learned here with you. It means having the opportunity to make different choices, to find redemption. But it also means you have to face the uncertainties of life, with all its challenges and pain. Nothing will be guaranteed, but you will have the chance to rewrite your story. Travis reflected on this. The idea of starting again, of perhaps correcting the mistakes of the past, was powerful. But there was also the fear of failing again, of making the same mistakes and ending up back where he started. However, he felt that he was no longer the same man who had started this journey. He had changed, learned, and grown. Perhaps, with this new perspective, he could do things differently. "What if I choose to move on?" Travis asked, his voice hesitant. "The road ahead is one of peace," the driver replied, his voice calm and assured. "It's the release of the burden you carry, the complete acceptance of what was and what is. It's the opportunity to leave the past behind, to finally find the rest your soul seeks." Travis felt a wave of relief when he heard those words. The peace, the idea of finally resting, was almost irresistible. But something inside him still hesitated. He thought of all the people he had lost, the opportunities he had let slip away, and the idea of simply leaving it all behind seemed incomplete. He felt there was more for him in the world of the living, something he needed to try. Finally, Travis took a deep breath and looked at the driver. "I choose to go back," he said, with a firmness that surprised even himself. "I want a second chance. I want to try again, to do things right." The driver smiled softly, as if he already knew what Travis' choice would be. "Then so be it," he said, with a gentle gesture of his hand. The darkness around Travis began to dissipate, like a mist being blown away by the wind. He felt a lightness take over his body, as if he were floating. The driver began to disappear, his figure disintegrating into the light that now enveloped Travis. "Remember, Travis," the driver's voice echoed one last time, now distant. "The choice you made today is just the beginning. Life is made up of choices, and each one shapes who you are. Make good use of the second chance you've been given." The light around Travis became more intense, until he could no longer see anything but white. He felt his body being pulled upwards, as if he were being lifted out of a deep dream. There was a soft sound, like birds chirping in the distance, and then, slowly, he began to regain consciousness. Travis opened his eyes and saw the white ceiling of a hospital room. The sound of the heartbeat monitors next to him was soothing and comforting. He was alive, and next to him, holding his hand, was the woman he loved, her eyes full of tears, but also of hope. He was back. With a new perspective, with a new chance, Travis knew that his life, from that moment on, would be different. He would make peace with his past, but he wouldn't let it define his future. He had chosen to live, and with that, he had chosen to change. And so his journey on the train from hell ended, but the journey of his life had only just begun.